and welcome to 9 to 42, the podcast from the team at the Guitar Show UK. Join us for interviews, updates and chat with artists, influencers and those that manufacture the gear that we love.
Hello and welcome to 9 to 42, which is the podcast from the guys at the Guitar Show UK. And after one episode of flying solo, Jason is back within the bosom of his 942 family. How are you, Jace?
I'm very good, mate. I'm relieved that you're here because Ant has COVID at the moment, and I've spent the day sat at my desk going, hello, welcome to 9 to 42, the podcast from the guys behind the Guitar Show UK, and hoping that I've got that right. Because I thought I was going to have to fly solo again tonight, but you're here and looking fine.
Well, I'm touched that you've tried to you thought that through and had a go at trying to do it. I'm really quite touched by that. Really quite touched. Our guest tonight is Rich Watson, and Rich is a session guitarist, YouTuber, purveyor of phenomenal knitwear, and I got it in with no kind of glitch there. Haven't got to edit it out. But before we start and say hello to Rich, I searched Rich Watson YouTube, put it into Google, right? Okay. And I wasn't aware that you had something on mudlarking and metal detecting. Because that's the first thing that comes up. How have you kept that quiet?
I thought you were going to say the old blues guy that I think is actually, he might have actually passed away now. So no, the metal detecting is news to me as well.
Yeah, you are the dead son of Doc Watson, the bluegrass player, aren't you?
You know, Spotify, I had some of my own music up on Spotify and they kindly merged our catalogues together. So I went to log in one day and suddenly I had access to all of Doc Watson's Spotify stats. Yeah.
And did that bring you a royalty check that went up from 73 pence to, £1.12?
Well, my conscience got the better of me and I flagged it, which was perhaps a mistake, but yeah.
No, I think you do right. Musicians need to stick together. We'll start with our normal kind of entry in, and actually on the day that effectively COVID is now finished, as far as our government's concerned, how's COVID been for you? How's the lockdown been for you?
Surprisingly good, oddly. Obviously the gigging thing was devastating. But it kind of led to me getting to do some things which I'd wanted to do for a while. And one of them was doing a lot more kind of remote recording projects. I've been doing a great kind of ongoing album project with a Canadian artist. And it's all kind of like 80s AOR, which is obviously right up my street. So between that and sort of, the lecturing at the same place where Jace also lectures and doing the YouTube thing, I've been kept sort of fairly busy, really. So I certainly don't feel like I have anything to complain about.
Well, actually, that's quite interesting because I was chatting today to Chris Woods, who we had on the podcast a few episodes back, and we were talking about whether we thought electric guitars were on the way back in with real purpose. Because I seem to have noticed a lot more guitar format bands in the last 2 or 3 years. Now, you've just mentioned an AOR project. But I am starting to hear that coming back. Am I imagining that, or is that a thing?
No, you're not. You're not. That sound is coming back as well. There seems to be a bit of a resurgence within the guitar of that 80s thing. It kind of became terribly uncool in the early 90s, and it seems to be kind of making its way back around again. And I'm starting to see more and more rack systems popping back up and a lot more chorus going on. So yeah, it probably is due for a little bit of a resurgence from that sort of decade, I guess.
Well, and pointy headstocks as well. I'm starting to see a few more pointy headstocks around.
I'm just relieved to see headstocks back, really.
Yeah. Oh, right. Well, I'm not imagining it then. This is definitely a thing.
It seems to be. Yeah,
right.
It seems to be.
Just at the point where I'm incapable of growing my hair again. It's coming back round.
Oh, poor Ant. You could grow it again. It just won't look like it did.
No, it won't. No. It'll look like when Paul Weller grew his out.
Oh, you look like your nan.
Yeah.
I could see some kind of extension situation happening, perhaps.
I think that's a phrase we ought to leave behind.
Might be hospitalised, but
I suppose that leads us into quite nicely, which is the thing that we really wanted to talk about was session heroes. Sure. And when I asked you if you want to do the podcast, and I said to you, you really confused me because you're about 20 years younger, and you listen to all of that and replicate all of those sounds that were when I was a teenager, which, let's be honest, was quite a long time ago now. So you have a YouTube playlist, because you've got a YouTube channel, haven't you, which is Richard Watson, I think.
Yeah, that's right. You got it.
And you've got various playlists. So there's covers on it. There's many walkthroughs of your pedal board and its evolving pedal board, which was actually quite interesting. There was top 10 tips that I watched today of pedal boarding, only because I bought 2 new pedals today. And here we are.
Ooh,
just to show you.
What have you got?
So I've got an acoustic preverb Fender pedal, because I've got an acoustic gig coming up. So it's a preamp and a reverb pedal in one.
Cool.
And I'm assuming you pronounce it Mua. Yellow comp compression pedal to go on my new acoustic pedal board that I'm building.
Very cool.
Yeah. So anyway, enough about my purchases from today. So session heroes. How? Why? What? Go.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it depends. How far back do you want to go with this?
Well, I watched a very, very young Rich Watson on episode 1 of Session Heroes, which looked like you were in a cupboard, frankly, recording it. But yeah, let's go back to the start.
Yeah, I mean, I'd sort of become a bit fixated on those sorts of players for a good kind of 2 or 3 years or so before I started doing it, and those videos were really just born out of frustration of not feeling like those guys were really. It's not even like they're not recognized exactly, but you really have to kind of like scratch around to find lots of information on them. You know, it's not kind of like localized to one place. And I always felt like they were such an important part of the history of music. And it's not just the 80s guys. This goes back to like the 60s. I just had this kind of overwhelming sort of sense that I just wanted to do something with it. I wanted to bring more people's attention to it. I wanted to teach more of the stuff, you know, because it's kind of like an era of music that's been like with me from the beginning, really. So yeah, it's kind of it's something which is like evolved. I did the first episode just before I went out to LA for like a couple of weeks, and actually got to go and see Michael Landau at the Baked Potato and see Scott Henderson and stuff like that. And then it's kind of become a bigger and bigger focus of the stuff that I will do online. And originally it was these kind of longer episodes where it would give you like a bit of background about the player's life and how they got started, and kind of picking up on a few kind of key highlights from their discography and demonstrating sounds, talking a bit about their rigs. And then it's kind of like, I don't know, I suppose it's diversified into some more digestible stuff, because most of those things are like 20 minutes of complete dorkery, basically.
No, I found it quite interesting because it is the kind of the music of my teenage years. I'm aware of them, I think, because, you know, I bought guitar magazines in the 80s and they were featured, like you say, no one talks about them now, but they certainly did then, sort of thing. But it just, to me, it just seems so incredibly out of touch, I suppose, at the time, because that rack gear would have cost thousands. And I was scratching around with a little solid state Fender amp, which is what I was gigging with. And it just, I think it is really interesting. It's a really interesting part of the guitar's development over the last, well, certainly that decade, but probably the mid to late 70s through to Nirvana, basically, isn't it?
Yeah, sonically, for sure. It was definitely like a moment. And it's so recognizable, and it's sort of dated quite quickly, and then has come sort of back around. But I mean, the sound is only really like a part of it. The whole session musician thing. I mean, those guys actually, you know, people were aware of how much they were doing. People like Lukather and the Porcaro brothers, it was well known, you know, they were playing on everybody's records. But before that, the generations before, session musicians were really kind of like hidden away. If we're talking about like the Wrecking Crew, which was in like the 60s, those guys were regularly flown in to sort of basically, you know, play on things like the Beach Boys records, or you know, the Righteous Brothers or Sonny and Cher, and majority of the time they weren't credited for their work at all. They weren't even on the, you know, the album credits. And it's kind of like every decade has its own group of guys. It started off, I mean, sort of Tommy Tedesco and Glenn Campbell. They were the first kind of rock star session musicians, really. Before that, it was really kind of the whole job was confined more to like readers and jazzers, and it's kind of, you turn up, you play what's written, and then you go home. It was quite kind of stuffy. And people like Glenn Campbell, they were the first generation who had to, they brought their kind of contemporary edge to the studio with them, and they wrote loads of stuff in the studio. So rather than reading what was presented to them, they would be interpreting and bringing in their kind of contemporary rock and roll edge to this music. So it really kind of started with those guys, and then you saw people like Larry Carlton in the 70s playing on Steely Dan records. And so, you know, by the time we get to the 80s guys, it's almost like third generation almost, you know, Steve Lukather, Michael Landau, Dan Huff, all those dudes. And then it sort of carried on up to a point, but I'd say that the 80s through to kind of like the mid 90s could be considered the sort of golden era of session dudes. And then it's kind of, as technology got better, the necessity to have really amazing musicians decreased, you know, because as it became, you know, easier and easier to edit stuff, or, you know, to not have the necessity of going in and hiring a recording studio, the need to have these guys that could come in, nail something in one take, come up with stuff on the fly, just gradually over time sort of dissipated, sadly. So for me, that's kind of the fascinating thing about particularly the 80s, is that I feel like musicianship has, in some areas, kind of dipped off a little bit from that point, you know?
Well, I don't think you're necessarily wrong, and I don't think we should say it. I mean, there was a report. I can't remember which paper it was in. It's in one of the proper papers, Guardian, Telegraph, something like that, where it had done an analysis of.
Are we saying the Telegraph's a proper paper, or is it just a big paper?
It's a big paper. It's not a red top.
That's fine. Just. Sorry. Carry on.
Yeah, and they'd done an analysis of the complexity of music and the basically the cliff that it's fallen off in the last sort of like 10, 15 years, particularly, that we're now getting down to, you know, a repeating 2-3 note pattern, and that is it. So there's no real need to hire a Lukather to come along and play on something where it is literally chink, chink, chink. You know, pretty much anybody can do that. They're sort of like the piano parts that I record when I'm demoing up stuff, you know. You can move them around because they're MIDI and stuff, you know, it's fine. So I think it's partly the no need to hire a recording studio, but I also think it's the way that music's gone, and maybe music is going to become more complex again, hopefully, in the future.
Do you think there's something in the fact that through that decade, guitarists who potentially would have been session players before actually became recognised as guitar players? That actually the fact that, you know, the likes of, you know, be it Satriani's or Vai's or what have you, talented guitar players were being recognised as talented guitar players. So maybe these players might have gone under the radar a decade earlier.
Yeah,
but they were actually being talked about. They were being interviewed. That their influence was being recognised.
You probably see it with the rise of the guitar magazine, though, as well. I mean, I'm not sure there were any guitar magazines in the 70s. There might have been like Practicing Musician or something like that, but I'm fairly certain things like Guitarist and Guitar World started in the 80s, and of course they need something and people to write about.
Yeah.
And the guitar was in everything as well. I mean, you had so many great rock bands in the 80s, but it found its way into most pop music. Most pop artists had a kind of rock phase, whether it's like Stevie Nicks or obviously Michael Jackson or whoever. It was really kind of center stage. So yeah, I think it did bring those guys to forefront a little bit more. And then it kind of guitar virtuosity became uncool again, you know?
Yeah.
With grunge, and then we see it sort of fade a bit.
And these guys also started doing lots of tuition videos. You know, it all became, but I guess the point being that, as I say, they were being seen in different places in a way they'd probably never been seen, never been seen before.
Mm.
My favourite tuition video is, not to mention Kiss, but mention Kiss, the Vinnie Vincent tuition video, which has clearly been sped up because
Seriously, I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, it's on YouTube. It's beyond awful. But I recommend that you do watch it.
The Frank Gambale ones are always a personal favourite, not because of the content, but just because of his wardrobe choices. It's just unparalleledly bad dress sense. Incredible.
Yes. I had Frank's for a couple of shows. Long time ago now. Must have been when I was doing it at the NEC. In fact, I haven't seen him at NAMM or anything for years. I assume he's just kind of dropped off the radar. You know.
He's still going. He's still amazing. He's sporting sort of Hannibal Lecter vibe these days, which I think is very cool. But those 80s instructionals were something else. So good.
So, what got you into this? What was that spark for you?
Oh man, I mean, I was a bit like you when the thing that got me into music was Kiss and Alice Cooper. That was before I even played guitar, you know? And then my first, when I did start playing, the thing that did it for me, that made me want to start, was hearing Appetite for Destruction. I didn't even know what it was. I had one of my dad's friends who, back in his youth, was a complete hellraiser. He used to sort of just like bung me cassette tapes, unmarked, so I never knew what they were. And I think it had like AC/DC on one side and like Guns on another. And listened to the AC/DC thing. I was like, oh, cool, whatever. Turn it on. And it was the start of Welcome to the Jungle. And it was kind of it for me. It was one of those literal light bulb moments where I was just like, I don't know what is going on, but this is what I want to do. What's happening right now? You know? So I was a complete like Slash and Queen nut for the first kind of couple of years I was playing. And then my folks took me to London to go and watch We Will Rock You, because I was obsessed with anything Brian May related, you know? I watched the whole thing. It's cool, and I obviously there for the music and the guitar and stuff. And then at the end of the show, they brought down the musicians who were in the wings, and I watched the whole thing without realizing that it was live music. And when these guys came out, I couldn't believe that I'd been listening to people replicating those sounds and playing those parts so perfectly. And again, it was another one of those kind of moments where I was just like, that's what I want to do. Whatever that job is, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. Yeah. And then it was kind of through that when I got to the other side of college and it came to looking at unis and stuff, I ended up going to ACM, and I went to ACM in Guildford purely at the time because they had guys like Jamie Humphries there, and Jamie had done We Will Rock You, and he'd done stuff with Brian May, and he'd toured with all these guys. And at the time it was like him, Pete Friesian from Alice Cooper's band. He's actually in the Wayne's World movie when they do the, you know,
We're Not Worthy.
Yeah. And Mike Caswell, who was in LA at the same time as a lot of these guys, and he was like friends with Steve Farris from Mr. Mister and all those sorts of dudes. And it kind of, I suppose it started there really, and I wasn't necessarily super aware of all the session guys while I was studying at ACM, but I was having like a lot of tutorials of Mike Caswell, and I was kind of absorbing his style, which was this mixture of, really looking back, it's like a lot of Jeff Beck, but a lot of Steve Lukather, a lot of Michael Landau. It's sort of feeding my subconscious. I was still into, you know, guitar for the sake of terrorizing other guitar players to all the virtuoso guys at the time, you know. But then something I don't know. I can't remember who I discovered. I think I probably discovered a more modern session guy first called Sean Tubbs, who's now like a big YouTube guy as well. But back then there was almost nothing on him on the internet. It was really, really hard to find stuff. There was like, he had one video up and I saw it, and it immediately I'd never heard anything that I liked as much as that. And I immediately became quite obsessed with finding out as much as I could about him. And he had like a MySpace page at the time. And I remember he'd listed who his influences were. And these names popped up, like Michael Landau, Lyle Workman, these dudes. And that was kind of where it started. I became really obsessed with exploring the lineage of other guitar players. So I wanted to find out everyone who influenced Sean. And then I went to those guys and looked at who influenced them, and you go back and you go back and you go back. And suddenly you end up with this amazingly rich list of incredible players who have played on everything. And then you discover their discographies, and you go to somebody like Landau, and he's played on, I don't know how many thousands of records, going back to like the 70s up until literally now. And it's amazing because it's all this stuff you've been listening to your whole life. And it's all the same guys. It's all the same, like 5 dudes playing on all of these records. And I don't know, it just connects with me in on many, many levels. And I think part of it is just that the level of musicianship with them was so high. You know, I couldn't help feeling a little bit disappointed sometimes when I would look to my sort of hero guitar players from sort of, I don't know, Guns or bands from that era. And I'd see them playing in a context that wasn't their band, and I'd just be a bit like, oh, it's a little bit like underwhelming sometimes, you know? Like you see them put out of their comfort zone. And when I found the session players, it kind of seemed like there was just nothing they couldn't do really well. Yeah. Whatever they turned their hands to, I guess it was like the kind of school musician approach, but something about that really, really appealed to me as a musician. So whatever it was I was listening to at the time, like I always aspired to try and get somewhere near to just the level of like musicianship those guys had. So that was a very, very long-winded, waffling answer to your question.
No, but I mean, you look at the discography of Landau, and I was just looking while we were talking at his discography and also Dan Huff's discography, and that really is an A to Z of everything probably recorded between like 80 and 95 that had a reasonable guitar part. I mean outside of things that, you know, with band members, and you do forget, like you said at the beginning, how dominant that guitar sound was across pop. You know, I was looking at things like Laura Branigan and Belinda Carlisle and Michael Bolton, and things that you forget how guitar-driven those albums were, you know, and some incredible stuff. I mean, I still think Self-Control, Laura Branigan's got an absolute killer guitar riff in it. I think it's phenomenal. I always have thought it was phenomenal. Wrapped up in a 3.5 minute pop song.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was everywhere. It really was everywhere. And you I mean, particularly me, because I was obviously pretty young, you know, coming up in the early 90s and stuff like that. And you realize that these guys were playing on like Disney soundtracks and movies and everything. So it really is like they're so interweaved within the fabric of everybody's life, really, because it's the soundtrack to whatever was going on in that particular decade. I think that's why it's so cool.
Well, you could make a living, I imagine, playing on the songs that, you know, like you said, were just on the film soundtracks. I mean, think about every single one of those hits that became an uber hit in the 80s that were actually stemmed from a film.
Yeah, and there's guys who it seemed that like guys either fell into the camp of kind of making records or doing movie dates, and then some of them would do both. So there was guys like Dean Parks who would do both, and you'd see him on the big pop records, but he'd also do loads of movies. And then there are the guys who mostly do movies, like Carl Verheyen, who's another incredible session guy. And these guys are all in their like 60s, approaching 70s now, and they're still going, and they're still absolutely badass. They're just incredible players. They're so good.
I mean, you say that you see some of your heroes outside of the comfort zone and they're not that good, which I kind of get that. I just wonder with these session
this
guys,
podcast for a start.
Well, yeah, quite almost on a bi-weekly basis. it's quite interesting because, like, you know, see, if you take Slash is only really good at being Slash, but he has a ton of charisma, which is, it's like a different skill set, isn't it, to Landau, that's able to bend and fit in and play with anybody. But no
Definitely.
one wants to see him with a top hat on, swagger to the front of the stage and play Sweet Child of Mine.
Yeah, completely. And it's absolutely not to undermine the importance of any of those guys, because it was their sound. Like, of course, Slash's thing is that he sounds like Slash, but man, what a thing to sound like, and what a writer. You know, it doesn't take a thing away from what those guys do within their own context. It's just as amazing.
You feel both voids, don't you? Because you do play. And, you know, I was looking at pictures of Landau earlier, and I was like, man, he looks like he shops at Primark. And you don't. You kind of get that aesthetic thing as well. Are you kind of like torn on this path of session performer?
I was so torn about it. I had I gave myself a really hard time about it over the course of a couple of years, where I was really struggling to figure out where I lived with this, because it's two separate halves of your brain, because I was really attracted to the musicianship of these session guys, but at the same time, nothing makes me feel anything more than listening to like Nine Inch Nails or like Jeff Buckley or, you know, any of those amazing like 90s acts. So yeah, I had a real kind of split personality kind of thing about that. And I don't know at what point it sort of settled, but certainly now, like, I feel really lucky to be able to have this, which is kind of my hobby and my like practice. And this is the sort of stuff that I'll sit down and work on by myself and transcribe things for hours and whatever. But also I've always managed to keep up with having a band or being in a band or playing for other people's bands, you know? And to be fair, like, a lot of those guys did as well. They had their own things going on the side, and a lot of them ended up drifting away from sessions because it became too much of the too samey, you know, the same things, same progressions. And even like Landau ended up having some like really intense sounding semi like grunge meet Steve Ray Vaughan project in the 90s called Raging Honkies. So yeah, it's almost like different muscles or different sides of your brain or something. It's different. It's hard to explain.
Do you think this is part of the fact that almost for any given era, any given generation, that you need some form of factory to kick pop out in quantity? Because if you go back, you probably go back to Tim Panelli, but you work it forward. There's been plenty of different, you know, genres that have had a production line of material, whether it be dance music, whether it be, you know, Britpop to a certain extent, whether it was, you know, the rock and sounding, at the point when those genres kind of were the pop mainstream. I mean, I was just looking around some of those lists of records, and yes, there's the soundtrack of my youth on those records, but I would never put one of those albums on to sit and listen to an album.
Same.
What you're saying is that actually on all those artists, there's 2 or 3 tracks, and they were the singles, and they drove the charts, they drove the hits albums without a shadow of a doubt. But if you want to go and listen, you know, if I want to go and listen to a rock album from the 80s, I will pick Guns N' Roses, or I will pick Def Leppard, or I will pick Bon Jovi, because actually from the beginning to the end, I can listen to every one of the tracks. Yeah,
exactly. And I think that's the thing. I think that they both kind of need each other, because, you know, in that case, that era you're talking about, it's like the rock guys came first, and like with bands like Guns, it's like they were living in their rehearsal space. They were exactly what their aesthetic and their story and all that stuff was all lined, and it was so authentic to who they were, and that's what made it so exciting and dangerous and volatile and all this sort of stuff. But then it's this inevitability that happens, this cycle within popular music where something really exciting and amazing will come along, and then people cotton on to the fact that it's popular, and it becomes the mainstream, and suddenly every pop artist has got a rock guitar on. It's exactly the same thing happened in the 90s. You know, you had a few bands that came along and destroyed glam metal in like one fell swoop, and then all of a sudden, grunge becomes the establishment, and all the mainstream clothing retailers are selling flannel shirts and torn jeans and stuff. So it's this ongoing thing that will always happen. Inevitably, like the innovation comes with the bands and the original artists, and then it will be appropriated by pop.
And just unfortunately for a while, the factory that's been kicking out hasn't required guitar, really, has it, for a while? That's the problem.
No, I mean, there is so much great modern music out there. It's just not really making its way onto the radio. There are loads of great bands doing really exciting things, but it's getting harder and harder to find. Because we find music in a different way these days as well, it's harder to discover stuff, and it's become more kind of secular, but I have so little interest in what I hear on the radio these days. I sound like such an old dude saying that, but I just...
Welcome to the club.
Yeah.
You just got there a lot earlier than me and Ant did.
But it all just feels so safe to me. It's so like I hear the same song over and over again.
Yeah.
The same melodies, same top lines, because it's like, oh well, we know this worked once, so we'll just do it again and do it again, kind of thing. So you seem to have to search a lot harder to find stuff that's unique and interesting. It's sort of buried away, squirreled away somewhere.
And maybe that was the same in the 80s. Maybe it's not any different. Maybe it's just the fact that there's an era that you invest in, and so you get closer to it and you hear the differences between the tracks. But actually, in reality, you could put a Michael Bolton track on in the 80s and then just take Michael off and put Cher on, or take 100%. Cher off and put Belinda Carlisle on, or Laura Branigan on, whoever. And actually, the song's probably pretty much the same.
Yeah, but I think labels were braver back then as well. I think because there was probably more money in the industry and stuff. I think that they were a bit more willing to take risks with stuff and to elevate stuff that might be a little bit more kind of alternative. Because you had, even bands like Tears for Fears, amazing. Not really like a pop band, and particularly not when they started. It was kind of a bit odd and new wavy and stuff, but they were supported, and then they became something really big,
I'm a big Tears for Fears fan. I think they were incredible.
Yeah, me too, man.
And you're right, brave, and a very interesting arc. If you look at their material arc as well, it's never stopped developing, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
So it kind of leads us onto your own sort of like music, of which there are many strands. I think. What is it? Deadwood music. Is that one of it? Was it Ghosts? That horrific video that you did, which is brilliant, but truly
harrowing.
Yeah, video.
My poor mum cried when I showed her that. Yeah. Ghosts was my thing. That was my I don't think I can use the word solo project without wincing, but it was just me really. I sat and wrote an album by myself, and then I got a couple of my friends who are really great drummers to come in and do that, and then I did everything else, and I did the guitars and synths and keyboards and vocals and stuff. And that's kind of that's the other side of the sort of musical personality coming out. That's all the heavy stuff, the Nine Inch Nails and the cool 90s alternative stuff that periodically just demands to be let out of the box. Do you know what I mean? I can be doing stuff playing for other people for quite a long time, and then usually when I notice that I'm becoming a bit more irritable in my day-to-day life, it's an indication that I need to go and write some music, and that's what's come out. And it's never, much as I love the 80s guys and the session guys and stuff, I never write like that. That's not what comes out when I sit down to write, and it's not what I want to write really, so yeah, that's my thing. I'm obviously have like a couple of my other bands which I'm either in or playing for or whatever. I've got Black Sky Research, which is the thing with Mikey from used to be Mallory Knox, and we originally had Jason Bold from Bullet doing drums on that, which is like a bit more of a modern vibe, and then a truly mean sounding industrial project called Drowned, which is like the quite kind of extreme end of that spectrum. But yeah, I mean, I couldn't do any one of those things all the time. You know what I mean? If I was chugging and throwing myself around and doing that stuff all the time, I'd start to become musically frustrated because I'd feel like I wasn't challenged enough. And at the same time, I need that stuff from like an artistic output. So it's just balancing it and sort of spinning the plates, really. Did you
tour Ghosts?
We started, and then the pandemic happened. Yeah, it'd been incubated for like a couple of years while I was just writing stuff, and I'd been doing it through music videos and stuff. I think I'd done about 4 before I even put a band together around it. And then we did put a band together, and we did start going out and playing it live. And then literally, I think it was the week that I released the album, because it had been set up in advance through AWOL and stuff. I think that's when we had our first lockdown. I was like, oh well, that's that then, because it's like, you know, the world's falling into chaos, and you're just like, hey guys, I got an album out. Hi.
I mean, it's interesting, you know, the people we've spoken to that, you know, have got projects that had been held.
Yeah.
Particularly over the first sort of lockdown, they were like, "Oh, we'll just delay them and put them out later in the year." And then, you know, we career into lockdowns 2, lockdowns 3, and all of a sudden albums start kind of seeping out. And I suppose because artists have been sat at home and they've written the follow-up and potentially the follow-up to that in this period of time, it's kind of like, I just need to get this stuff out, really. And I think in some cases it's worked quite well. I mean, there's been a lot of lockdown gigs and so on done. Did you consider doing anything like that?
It was just used as a period to incubate certain projects, really. I mean, the stuff that we probably did the most with in that period was with Black Sky Research, where we went and wrote and recorded the whole of like our first EP, which we put out, and then we started writing the second EP, and then we filmed a whole like pro shot live set in Vader Studios in their big like church looking live room. So we kind of the same thing. We amassed like a lot of material in that time, which we're now sort of sitting on, and you know, it'll be released sort of gradually. But I mean, from that perspective, it was like a really nice period. It was, and I don't think we'll probably ever experience anything like that again, where actually something disrupts your normal way of life entirely to the point where you actually can stop and have a quick look at your life. And in that period, I also stopped doing lots of stuff, because when you can kind of hop off the merry-go-round, you can kind of reassess and go, well, am I doing exactly what I want to be doing? Or is there some stuff that I've just got into the habit of doing all the time because that's what you do? You're a musician, you're busy all the time, you know? So from that perspective, it was a really nice, interesting period, because I was able to step back from some of the things that I you know, almost on the verge of burnout with how much I was gigging and stuff, and actually made a conscious decision to just refocus on doing the sort of music that I really love doing. And that's when these projects started, you know, doing more. It's the thing with you though, right? Because your solo stuff is now starting to be gigged, and you've been recording stuff on the down low. So you've kind of had like a similar sort of, seems like it's happened in the same period.
Yeah, I mean, I'd done an album prior to lockdown. Basically, I was in a band, and the band kind of split up, and I kicked around for 18 months going, got all these songs, what do I do? And just went in and recorded them, got 3 mates in that weren't in the band with me, and really enjoyed that. I honestly loved the kind of, they don't play my kind of music, so whatever they bought was completely different. Whereas previously the guitarist would say, oh, I'm playing it like that because I know you like that band, and it was like, yeah, I do like that band, but I don't necessarily want my own stuff to sound like that band. What we end up then is being a copy of that band, because I've taken the songwriting influences, but you know, so I worked with different musicians, completely different music tastes. I really loved working with the drummer, that when I went, I don't really like that drum beat, he went, oh, okay, how about this one? Whereas when you've been in a band in the past and you said to the drummer, I don't like that drum beat, the drummer's initial response is always, I don't like your fucking song, you know. And it was so nice to deal with someone who went, oh, okay, how about this one? And then that kind of sat, and I did the classic thing of, I got 50 CDs pressed because that was the minimum. I've still got about 20 of them in a box somewhere. And then I just started writing some more, and it's been very much a kind of piecemeal. I recorded 2 or 3 songs in between lockdowns, 2 and 3 sort of thing. I did one a couple of weeks ago. I'm in on Sunday to do another one. And I suppose the point is I collect them all up, and I've got 5 that are recorded now, so do those as an EP, and then do another 5, and then just stick it together and actually get some more CDs pressed because I'm old and I like CDs, because I listen to CDs in the car all the time, and I like them, and I like owning a product. But it has been it's been kind of interesting. I lost a lot of mojo for writing towards the end of the lockdowns. I was just kind of like, what is the point? I seem to be flogging myself to death over the university work that I do because that was so intense over lockdown, and didn't do anything for the guitar show. And then I think, in all honesty, I wouldn't even consider it depression. I just got really quite low with the guitar show, and it just kind of sucked all the joy of the guitar out of it. I read a lot of books about guitarists and guitars, but didn't play very much.
You can easily become oversaturated in it, can't you? When that's particularly, I think for you, that's such like a big part of your year. Yeah. So you're thinking about it all the time and liaising with these people all the time, So I can completely understand that. I think also, like, you need to have new stimulus and new experiences to prompt you into writing. Sometimes you need to be just pushed in a completely different kind of headspace in order to do it.
Do you know what kind of got me going recently? I just read Bob Dylan's Chronicles Volume 1.
Okay.
And it's just an amazing book. I mean, it's the most random autobiography you've ever read. Like, starts, I don't know, 3 years into his career, then the next chapter's like 10 years into a career, then the next chapter's another 10 years on, then the next chapter's the start of his career. It's not linear. They're just kind of stories. And I really like Bob Dylan, but I only really like a period of Bob Dylan. But I just found it, I don't know, it gave me a little kick. I mean, the bloke's written like thousands of songs. I've written maybe 150, of which 20 are all right. I mean, I'm sure he's written thousands and thousands that were terrible as well. But, he's Bob Dylan, maybe not. But that's kind of got me started. And having COVID a couple of weeks ago, which in the whole of this pandemic was the first time I'd actually stopped. Because I was like, my brain didn't work properly. I had really disrupted sleep as well, which was the only real side effect that I got, that I found myself sat here at 3 a.m. writing lyrics. I have no idea why. But if that's one of the side effects of my COVID, that's not too bad, right?
I wish that was on my side effects. I just had a headache.
Yeah. I mean, I did have a headache for the first day, like pounding, terrible headache for the first day. And then it was just weird sleep patterns. So, I don't know. Could have been much, much worse. But, I'm triple jabbed. I'm relatively healthy. So, not the worst thing in the world.
No.
So, Rich, what's next?
I mean, like all that stuff is ongoing, really. So in terms of projects and stuff, we're still, in the process of writing like a second release for BSR, and my stuff's kind of paused at the moment because the main thing for this year is doing a course for my Session Heroes thing, which has been something I've been planning for ages, and I'm kind of part way through at the moment, but I suppose a little bit in the spirit of like the old VHS instructional tapes that used to come out in the 80s, but a lot more in depth rather than kind of teaching people parts by these guys or solos and stuff. It's really breaking it down into like the concepts that they used from like a musical and kind of theoretical point of view. What do we see them doing a lot when they're on these recording sessions? How do they think about soloing? How do they think about part writing? and trying to sort of, I suppose, teach it to people in a way where they can apply it to their own stuff, because it's cool teaching people how to play a solo they love. That's fine, but it's not always super malleable in terms of, great, they can play that thing, but can you take those ideas and can you put them into lots of different contexts? Can you use it when you're improvising? So yeah, that's kind of going to be my summer project. Really, I've already kind of got most of it written. It's going to be like 20 different concepts. I've got 3 full tracks written in slightly different styles of like 80s pop session stuff. I've got Martin Johnson playing on the drum backing track. I've got Tim Bradshaw doing all the keys and synth stuff on it.
I should say, for those people that don't know, Magic Johnson plays drums for loads of artists. His most recent gig was playing in like Russia with Sam Fox, I think, which is amazing. And Tim Bradshaw is David Gray's keyboard player.
Yep, who's also played for John Mayer and all sorts of folks.
And John Mayer, yes, of course. Which is a bit mental, really.
It's crazy. But yeah, so it's going to be that, really. It's going to be kind of continuing to do the sort of YouTube thing while working on that. That's kind of like the main focus for this year, outside of the bands and the teaching and sessiony stuff. Yeah.
Any more UK country collective?
Funny enough, Tim has just asked me to do some shows with him. He wants me to do the country to country shows in London.
Oh, cool. I mean, they're massive, aren't they?
Yeah. Next month, so I need to hop in with his band. He's just sent me all the tracks over, and then I'm also doing like another one called Buckle and Boots with him.
Oh, that's up north, isn't it?
Yeah. So a bit more sessiony stuff as well, which would be really fun.
And interestingly, coming back round, and we talked obviously a little bit earlier about where rock became mainstream and then planted itself in pop, and to a certain extent, I thought for a while, a few years ago, rock had landed in country, and that's exactly where it was now, when you listen to some of the bands that were kicking around at the time. It
is. Modern country is 70s rock with some more electronics in, basically. It seems like that's where, like, you were talking about I think, Jace, you mentioned, like, the article we read about the complexity in pop music sort of, like, decreasing over time. I think a lot of that stuff found its way into modern country, Nashville songwriting stuff. That's where a lot of like the good songwriters seem to have like migrated to. So yeah, 100% modern country is very much cool 70s rock music mixed with, a bit of...
I'm fascinated by the whole... I mean, both me and Ant quite like country music, possibly different bits of it, but we both kind of come from... The Stones were the first alternative country band, if you like. And I know there's quite a few people. There's Steve from Blackstar with his band Gasoline and Matches, and there's Roy at the Uproar venue in Birmingham that started a country night, sort of a once a month sort of thing. And we're all kind of convinced that country will break through. It just seems to be butting up against the mainstream and just not quite getting through that barrier at the moment. But it does seem to be like the next big thing. Really.
It's definitely bubbling. There's definitely a scene. I used to be in a band with Steve, with Tim, the guy from the UK Country Collective thing. Right. It was the three of us had like an alternative kind of country project, and yeah, there's loads of cool stuff going on. I don't know whether it will ever break its way into the charts, so to speak, but there's definitely like a big following for it, for sure.
I've only got one more question.
Okie doke.
And what's with the triangles? I've never asked you. What's the triangles?
I'm going to give you the answer that I give to the students when I don't want to give them the real answer, which is in case I forget where my hands are when I'm on stage. Just reminds me of the time. I get asked that so many times, man. So yeah, I always give them my bullshit answer, but yeah.
Okay, you're not going to tell us what the triangles for.
No, I'm gonna give you the student one. Yeah.
Well, in which case, Rich, thank you very much for making the time.
No, pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It's been lovely. It's been lovely to chat, and obviously also nice to get an insight into mudlarking and metal detecting. which I need to be careful I don't put the link on the show notes to.
No, you should.
and while we're at it, 20 copies of the album still to go, Jace. Do you want to put a plug in for that now, or are you assuming they're never going to get sold?
No, they're never going to get sold.
Okay.
In fact, my 2 daughters gave me their copies back because they don't have CD players.
Right. And that's what they told you, is it?
That's okay. I don't care. I didn't do it for any reason other than that I wanted to do it.
We have been contemplating for a while whether we open a Patreon channel up, and maybe that's the gift for the first 20 patrons is a copy of 22. Obviously now we've got 22 back. Is a copy of your album?
No.
Or maybe what we say is that if you're one of the first 20 that gets him signs up, you don't get sent a copy, and actually the danger is in being between 22 and 40. I'm not quite sure.
Right, that's enough. Thank you, Ant.
All right, okay.
Remember to thank Focusrite for sponsoring 1942. Thanks, guys. Currently using a 2i2 right here, right now.
Right here, right now. Do you use Focusrite gear at all, Rich?
I don't have any at the moment. No, I don't actually, sadly.
Okay, well, I'll edit that out then. But thanks again. Have a good night. Everybody, we'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Bye.
Thanks for listening to 9 to 42, the podcast from the team at the Guitar Show UK. If you've enjoyed the show, then please remember to hit the subscribe button and share with other like-minded souls. For more information about 9 to 42, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram at the Guitar Show UK. This has been an A Short Stories production.